Hello everyone, welcome to another lesson of Life Sciences. Today we're going to carry on studying the parts of nervous system. We did say that the nervous system is a highly complex part of humans that is composed of many subdivisions. Mainly, it divides into two parts as central nervous system, which is abbreviated as CNS, and peripheral nervous system, which can be abbreviated as PNS. Each one of these main divisions is composed of two subdivisions within itself. For CNS here, it is composed of brain and the spinal cord, and the rest of nervous system falls under peripheral nervous system. And when we break this into parts, we're going to have sensory pathway and the motor pathway. Motor pathway again divides into two as a somatic nervous system and autonomic nervous system. And the somatic nervous system is a system that is controlling voluntary motor actions, and the autonomic nervous system is the one which is controlling the involuntary motor actions. Involuntary motor actions are the actions that are out of our control, and the voluntary ones are the ones that we can control. We have other two divisions which are falling under autonomic nervous system, which are sympathetic division and parasympathetic division. So this is here the general breakup of the entire nervous system. Now, the central nervous system is composed of two parts of the body, and the first one is going to be a brain, which is shown in this image here. This is an external view of human brain and is comprising certain sections, as you see here in this longitudinal cut of a brain. We will only focus on the parts which you need to know to write NSC exam. Now, the mostly exposed part here will be the cerebrum, which is the largest part of the brain, with two hemispheres, the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere. And these hemispheres are controlling the opposite sides of them in the body. For instance, the right side of your body is controlled by the left hemisphere of the cerebrum, and vice versa. There is C-shaped structure right under the cerebrum, which is corpus callosum. And next part here is going to be hypothalamus. And we have leaf-like parts of a brain at the back of brain, which we call as cerebellum, and it is cross-fluctuant. The appearance of this part is reminding a venation of a leaf. This is also having two hemispheres, and the very last part of the brain, just above the spinal cord, is going to be the medulla oblongata. Now let's see the tasks of these parts on a different diagram here. The cerebrum, which is the largest part of a brain, controls all voluntary muscular activities, receives and interprets sensations from sense organs like touch, vision, hearing, as well as speech and reasoning, emotions and learning. And the fine control of movements are also controlled by the cerebrum here. Then higher thought process, memory, and the judgment are also controlled by the largest part of the brain again, which is cerebrum. The next part is going to be the C-shaped structure of this brain here, corpus callosum here. The function of this is to connect the left and the right hemispheres of the brain, allowing communication between both hemispheres. So this will serve as a bridge between the two hemispheres. Now the cerebellum, the leaf-like part of a brain, it coordinates all voluntary movements such as posture, balance, coordination, speech, resulting in smooth and balanced muscular activity. As you see, both cerebrum and the cerebellum are involved in voluntary muscle activities. The difference is a movement initiated with the cerebrum is regulated and balanced with the cerebellum. For instance, if you are touching an object, the action will be executed by cerebrum, and cerebellum will make that action to happen accurate and coherent. Then it receives information from the sensory systems, the spinal cord, then regulates motor movements. It controls muscle tension and maintain balance. So the cerebellum is going to be center of locomotion and balance. If there is any damage in the cerebellum, it will end up with some disorders and unbalance at muscular actions. And the next part is going to be medulla oblongata. This is situated between the brain and the spinal cord. Thus, it will transmit impulses between the spinal cord and the brain. It will control involuntary actions such as heartbeat and breathing. Involuntary actions are the actions that are out of our control. And the last part here is a hypothalamus, which is a control center for visceral functions such as blood pressure, temperature regulation, appetite, thirst, sleep, emotional expressions, and other responses. Homeostasis here refers to internal metabolic balance, and the visceral is referring to internal organs of the body. So hypothalamus is going to be another part of brain which is controlling involuntary actions which are part of autonomic nervous system. There are three measures that are protecting the brain. Number one is a bony structure that we know as a skull. Number two, there is three-layered membrane called meninges. And lastly, we have cerebrospinal fluid that protects the brain from trauma. It will act as a shock absorber for brain. Now, the outer layer of the cerebrum is gray in color, and it is called cortex. And this gray color is because of the cell bodies and the dendrites of nerve cells. The inside of the cerebrum having a white matter, which consists of axons of nerve cells. Now, the next part of the central nervous system is a spinal cord. The spinal cord is a part of CNS that is extended from the brain down to hips and anchored in the vertebral column. This spinal cord has an average length of 45 centimeters. When it comes to the functions of the spinal cord, it is the pathway for all impulses conducted to and from the brain. And the spinal cord is going to be a center for all reflex actions. The spinal cord functions automatically and it is not controlled by the brain. And similar to brain, it is also protected by three means. Instead of skull here, it is protected by the bony canal called vertebral column. And secondly, it is protected by three-layered membrane called meninges. And finally, the fluid that is called cerebrospinal fluid. When it comes to gray and white matter, it is opposite of the brain. The gray matter here will be in the inner part of the spinal cord, and the white matter is on the outer layer of the spinal cord. Now, there are some revision questions for us. So 1.1 A is asking us to identify the part labeled A that's going to be spinal cord. You see these two structures here, A and B, which are very close to each other. The upper one is going to be medulla oblongata and the lower one is going to be spinal cord. And B, it says name the part labeled with C. This is going to be the C-shaped structure of the brain, which is connecting two hemispheres of the brain. That's going to be corpus callosum. And 1.2, it says write down the letter and the name of the part that has the center for interpreting taste. So that's going to be D, cerebrum. Now B, it asks the part regulating the heart rate. Heart rate is a involuntary muscle activity and that is controlled by the B, medulla oblongata. And C is asking the part which is responsible for motor coordination. And we said the motor coordination is controlled by the cerebellum, which is E. So these are the answers for this question. Now the reflex, it is now fully controlled by spinal cord. There are two terms that we need to know: the reflex action and the reflex arc. Learners sometimes being confused with these two. The reflex action is a rapid, autonomic, inborn response to a stimuli, such as pulling the head suddenly if it is touched by a hot object or punctured by a pen. So reflex action is going to be an action which is done quickly by a body. When it comes to reflex arc, there's going to be a pathway where the reflex actions are accommodated. So it carries stimuli from the receptors to spinal cord and from there to effectors during the reflex. This will include all components involved in the reflex action which are shown in here. This is a piece of spinal cord here. There's a white matter as an outer layer and a gray matter as an inner layer. Here are the receptors. In this case, that's going to be skin here and a pen which is going to serve as a stimuli. So the receptors are here stimulated and taken to the spinal cord by these sensory neurons here. And this is taken through the dorsal root of the spinal cord. And there is an interneuron between the sensory neuron and the motor neuron, and that is situated in the spinal cord. And this is a motor neuron which is taking the impulses to muscles here, which is going to be effector through the ventral root of the spinal cord. When it comes to the sides here, the upper part will be dorsal side, and the front side of the spinal cord, which is below part here, is going to be ventral side. So the root where the sensory neuron is coming into the spinal cord is going to be dorsal root, and the root where the motor neuron is leaving the spinal cord is going to be ventral root. And there is a swelling, as you see here. This is accommodating the cell body of the sensory neuron. This is called ganglion. So this whole diagram here is called as reflex arc. There is another example here. In this case, the fire is going to be a stimuli, and it is received by the receptors in the skin, and impulses are taken to the CNS by sensory neuron. And there is a relay neuron here in the spinal cord. The response is going to be created by spinal cord, sending the impulse to the muscles through the motor neurons. Again, the dorsal root is going to be root where the sensory neuron coming in, and the ventral root is a root where the motor neuron is leaving the spinal cord. And as you see here, the response is done by the body by removing the hand from the fire here. And as we mentioned before, the reflex actions are not controlled by the brain. The brain is later being notified by the spinal cord. Sensations relate to the brain. So this is going to be another example of reflex arc. Now there are some other questions for us. Question number 1 asks to identify the parts 1, 2, 3 and 5. So the part number 1 is going to be the largest part again, which is cerebrum. And part number 2 is going to be medulla oblongata. The part number 3, the part that is taking impulses from the receptors towards the CNS, is going to be sensory neuron or afferent neuron. And number 5 is going to be leaf-like part of a brain, which is cerebellum. Then the question number 2, it asks us to draw and label the type of neuron as indicated by number 4. Here it is, and this is a neuron taking impulses from CNS to the muscles, which are effectors. In life sciences, when we draw tables, graphs and diagrams, guys, we mustn't forget to put a caption for them. In this case, this will be the name of the neuron, that is motor neuron. Let's now label this. These parts are going to be dendrites. Then the cell body. We can show the nucleus in the cell body, guys. And this part here is going to be axon. Here is the myelin sheath. And gaps here, which are nodes of Ranvier. You can even put the last part of axon, which is end plate. These are the nerve endings which are filled with synaptic vesicles containing the neurotransmitters. This is it, guys. So the mark allocation for this will be 1 mark for caption, another mark for the correct neuron drawn, and rest 3 marks for any 3 correct labeling. So this is it about the central nervous system, guys. Now let's start the next part of it, which is going to be peripheral nervous system. The peripheral nervous system is all the nervous tissue outside the central nervous system. It is divided into somatic nervous system and autonomic nervous system, and is made of 43 pairs of nerves. 12 pairs of them are cranial nerves, which are extended from the brain, and the rest 31 pairs are the spinal nerves, which are extended from the spinal cord. Here the somatic nervous system. This receives information from receptors and conveys the information to the CNS. It also transmits impulse from CNS to effector organs. And the second subdivision, which is falling under the motor pathway, is autonomic nervous system. This controls the involuntary actions like heart rate, breathing, digestion and glandular functions. For example, the saliva secreted by the salivary glands. The autonomic nervous system has two branches. These are sympathetic branch and parasympathetic branch. The sympathetic branch prepares the body for energy expending, stressful or emergency situations. The parasympathetic branch is active under ordinary, restful conditions. These two systems have an opposite effect. One stimulates, the other inhibits. Each organ in the body is innervated by the sympathetic nerve and the parasympathetic nerve. Here are some examples for these two branches, guys. We say the sympathetic branch is preparing the body for emergency, then it will stimulate, while the other one inhibits. The first example here, the heart rate is increased by the sympathetic branch during the emergency, and it is decreased by the parasympathetic branch after the emergency. Same applies here. The walls of the bladder are relaxed by the sympathetic branch, and they are contracted back by the parasympathetic branch after emergency. Pupils are dilated by the sympathetic branch in the stressful conditions, and they are constricted back by the parasympathetic branch. And many arteries are constricted by the sympathetic branch again, and they're dilated by the parasympathetic branch. And the blood pressure is increased by the sympathetic branch during the emergency, and it is decreased by the parasympathetic branch after the emergency. And this is it for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please thumbs up if you did, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. I will see you in the next lesson.